Well, that's a wrap, and a lot of people got to see it. Welcome into Oklahoma Sooners Live. We come your way each and every Wednesday, typically at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. Keep that date in your calendars for future weeks. But we also remind you that sometimes we got to switch things up. That's why it's important to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for the notifications to get the live notifications. So we come your way this week on Tuesday because we can't wait to talk spring game. Jason Ray's here, of course, to make it all happen from Last Word on College Football. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. How about you?
I am doing well. And so I guess we will just dive right into it.
Yeah.
And all sorts of things can be made out of spring game performances. The one thing that can't be distorted is the fan enthusiasm showing up in throngs for a spring game.
Yeah, coming into this, Mark, I knew with the kind of the increase in the fan outpouring of support for Venables and the staff, and everything that has happened over the last couple of months, you knew there would be an increased interest in this program early on, right? But I don't think even a lot of people that follow it very closely ever anticipated 75,000 people being there for the spring game, and that's what ended up being. We talked on here a couple of times where it heard anecdotally that there was 35,000 tickets sold, and on Friday it was made known by Toby Rowland, who's the play-by-play voice for Oklahoma football games, and he had mentioned on his radio show that there was about 60,000 tickets sold on Friday morning, and then ended up they anticipated having a decent walk-up crowd, and so 75,000 is incredible. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, just generically speaking. I know that Nebraska, Georgia, Alabama, a lot of these teams have traditionally had a very large attendance for their spring games, but Oklahoma's never been a team that has, or the fans, at least from my perspective, have really supported it at the level that it was supported this year. There was a couple of years where Oklahoma had around 50,000 and 40,000, but not near what Oklahoma had on Saturday. So so yeah, I think that was a big thing. One of the things that we had talked about, and Venables has spent a lot of time talking about, is you know essentially waking that sleeping giant from a fan base perspective, understanding the culture shift and the culture change, and that was very evident early on. But obviously came to fruition here in the spring game on Saturday. So I think even more so, understanding the threat of bad weather. The forecast wasn't super optimistic, for Saturday in terms of rain and wind and potential tornadoes and things like that. So credit to the Oklahoma fan base for coming out there for what was a very entertaining spring game. Obviously, the Baker Mayfield statue unveiling played a little bit of a role in that as well. But I think that a lot of people wanted to get an up close view of what this program would be like, or is starting to look like under Brent Venables, and I think we all got a little small taste of what that will look like come fall.
Jason, while we're still on the topic of not the nuts and bolts on the football field, but the atmosphere and the events surrounding the game, and you brought up Baker Mayfield, was anything said? Did he give a speech? Was there anything out of the ordinary other than the thank yous and it's great to be here from Baker Mayfield or anybody else?
So it was really a big weekend. They had an event on Friday for some of the players, ex-players only, where the people that were responsible for purchasing the statue got a little bit of a firsthand glimpse of what that looked like. And then, so there was a lot of media availability, things that he did on Friday. Saturday, he threw out the first pitch for the softball game that was held in Norman. And then, to your point, yeah, there was a halftime speech and in where they unveiled the statue in Heisman Park that Oklahoma has, and in typical Baker Mayfield status, he talked a lot about how appreciative he was for the Oklahoma Sooner fan base. Got choked up a couple of times, really kind of talking about his career from a collegiate perspective, what led him to Oklahoma, and really thanking those that were a part of it. But also in Baker Mayfield, the way that he is, and I think this is something that endears the Sooner Nation to him. Is he took a shot at Oklahoma State after the he had a kind of a post game the discussion talking about the statue, and the way that the statue was made was from the game against Oklahoma State, where he stiff armed a defender and scored a touchdown in that 2017 game. And obviously, the way that he did it in such a way that kind of showed the Heisman pose there when you slow motion. So he made a comment about little brother having to continuously see that over and over again. So I mean, I think those are the things that he does that has traditionally, engraced himself with Sooner Nation. That's probably, at least in the modern era, Mark, is the most popular Oklahoma Sooner football player. That's at least probably since Brian Bosworth, I would say, probably in terms of the most entertaining, the most flamboyant, guy that's out there. But he's one of the best leaders that we've ever seen in the history of college football, regardless of teams. So I think he's always been one of those guys that if he's on your team, you love him. If he's not on your team, you probably despise him. So very much in the same vein as Tim Tebow was looked at Florida for many years. So yeah, I think it was a good weekend that was sort of dedicated to him. I mentioned this before we went on. There was tons of former players. I think they said somewhere around 255, 260 players from all the way from the 70s to last year. So I think part of that was what Venables, his idea of making this a family and making this more of a player-led organization, player-led program. And obviously there was Kyler Murray was right there along with him on the when they were talking at midfield during halftime. And I think they'll have a similar celebration for Kyler next year. But no, I think it was a very cool tribute to him, and I think probably something good for him personally, right, with everything that's going on with him in Cleveland right now at the professional level. Just giving him opportunity to maybe forget about that for a couple of days and go back to his roots.
And as you mentioned, his polarizing nature comes to mind that I know a lot of both Ohio State fans that are also Cleveland Browns fans, and to see their transformation from this guy's a villain. There couldn't be a player outside the state of Michigan that was more hated than Baker Mayfield by Ohio State fans for what he did to them on the field, and then after the game on the field in 2017. And then within a few months, he's quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. And a lot of people changed their tune immediately. And I'm Facebook friends with a lot of Browns fans that aren't real happy with the way he's been treated by the organization. What else comes to mind, Jason, is that you gave us a very thorough and intriguing compare and contrast between Brent Venables and Lincoln Riley last week, and we discussed how that's playing out and how that's evident. And I would think an event like this, especially when it's extended beyond the football field to a multiple day event with a lot of interaction where it's beyond, again, the football, and you get to see people's personalities, hear them speak, that this would play into Brent Venables' strength as well, being a communicator, being somebody who's going to be engrossed and ingrained in the community and the culture, make himself accessible, that he's going to show himself in a great light in these kind of situations.
Yeah, absolutely, and you saw that a couple of times, Mark. Outside of the players, kind of the former players coming back, which was interesting, and some of the things that I had heard was that before the game was going to start. He was going to come out and say a few words to the fans. And one thing that he went a little bit off script was he made all the former players come from the sideline to come to the field, and took a few pictures and talked about how much he appreciated what they've done to kind of lay the groundwork for what this program has been all about through the years, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and current. And so I think that was something that I had heard a lot of former players talked about. They've never felt more appreciated. Mark, you talk about a lot of guys that have never set foot on the University of Oklahoma campus since the day they graduated, and for whatever reason didn't feel welcome back, or Riley didn't do anything out of normal to make himself available. Understanding previously, if any players that came back, it was typically Cale Gundy that kind of ran with this and tried to get this. But Venables made it a priority early on for the spring game to from a whole staff perspective, get a lot of these players back involved with the program, and involved with what they're doing kind of day by day. And we've talked a little bit about this off screen, that anytime Venables talks, it's like a walking motivational speech. And he talked a lot about how critically important it was for the fans to be here, how critically important it is for those ex-players to be here, and part of what he's trying to build. And I think Baker said it great. He said, we were we never went anywhere, but we're now back, type of a situation. So I think to this point, Brent Venables has done everything right, everything that you would hope that he would have done to this point. He has done so. And I think the other thing he mentioned at halftime, he took about 5 to 10 minutes to talk about the successes of all of the other sports at the University of Oklahoma. The women's gymnastics team just recently won a national championship. The softball team is doing really, really well consistently. But he took the opportunity to kind of, obviously knowing that the football program always has the lion's share of the media attention, the fans' attention, but wanted to take an opportunity to do that. So yeah, he has consistently went over and above what is required to talk about the program, to sell the program, and to get the fans in a place where they're supporting this team week in, week out, not only in the stands, but whatever it means. I think one of the things that he's talked about over and over is support in whatever way you can. If you can't come to a game, maybe you can donate some money. If you can't donate some money, maybe you can buy memorabilia or things like that. So whatever they can do to support this program, and he absolutely has everybody bought in so far. So we'll see how it goes come fall.
Yeah, it's impressive. We can't judge people's minds and hearts. We can't evaluate their actions, and whether he does this out of the goodness of his heart, and most likely he does, or he's just smart and thinks, I know what's going to benefit me and building this football program the most, that he just gets it, that college is about community and about engaging with people. Yes, the alumni are a huge factor, and then the current students, and it's all just one big community / family. And it serves well to embrace that and interact with that. No doubt about that. All right, Jason, when it comes to what happened on the field, I know that right out of the gate, they took some shots. Dillon Gabriel had his first crack at it. Daniel Parker, the tight end from Missouri, got a catch real early in the game and got involved. And other than that, yeah, a couple shots downfield and one to Theo Weiss to get them in scoring range. And we'll let you take it from there in terms of what stood out to you.
Yeah, I think Gabriel threw the ball pretty well considering the wind. going on. I think it was 19 out of 28, 250 yards, one touchdown, one interception. Interception was one where the wind kind of caught it a little bit. Great defensive play by cornerback Kendall Dennis on that play. But yeah, I think you got the one thing that was I think was interesting, and obviously for a spring game, the offense was very, very vanilla, right? Which is what you would expect. But yeah, you caught a glimpse of a couple of things I think that stood out for me offensively. The command that Gabriel had for the offense, I thought was really, really good. I think another thing that we thought that we would see out of this team, and you will with Levy's offense, is the ability to throw the ball down the field a lot. I think we'll see a lot more deep balls than we've seen in the past. But I think another thing was, he checked down to the running backs quite often, and something that you didn't see a whole lot of in Riley's offense, whether that was necessarily by design or just with what has happened in the past with kind of the receiving core and things like that. But there was quite a few check downs in terms of not forcing the ball. So I thought that was those were good things. And early on he played both sides of the ball. He was on both teams, I guess I should say, and so he got the lion's share of the snaps early on. I think Nick Evers was the first non Dylan Gabriel guy to come out and play quarterback, and Micah Bowens played a little bit as well. And I think looking at the quarterback situation, it was probably a little concerning coming in. And I know, and I think most people knew that Oklahoma, had some concerns from a depth perspective with Oklahoma coming in here to the spring, and I think that was confirmed, based on the way that the team looked and the way some of those quarterbacks played. So I think that was probably one of the only major concerns that you saw coming out of this game. You saw from a running back perspective, Javonte Barnes got a lot of carries, looked good, running between the tackles. Pretty strong. You Tyree Walker played a little bit, the junior college transfer. Had some good catches out of the backfield. Really reminded me of former running back Chris Brown from a few years ago, and kind of the way he runs and his stature and those types of things. Eric Gray played a little bit, didn't play a lot. I think Oklahoma knows what they have. Only had a few carries, but busted off a long carry. And then wide receiver core, you'd mentioned Theo Weiss a little bit, got one of those catches early on. You saw Marvin Mims cut a touchdown pass. Jaden Gibson caught a long touchdown pass there in the second half when there was more of a running clock situation. So I think looking at it from a very positive perspective, offensive line looked good, specifically the guys that are going to be counted on to play. I think the one challenge that you saw from both offense and defense, Mark, is the way that the teams were split up. It was more of kind of a draft style setup. So you had the the specialists on the offensive side kind of split up between teams. Offensive linemen were split up. Individual unit groups were split up. So it wasn't necessarily a good view into how are these teams going or how are these guys going to work cohesively as an individual unit. But you got to see some of the flashes individually of some of those players. So offensive line look solid. I think the one thing that you would look for as the transfer portal gets kicked up here is I wouldn't be surprised if Oklahoma goes after wide receiver in the portal offensively. Wouldn't be surprised at all to see if they go after a backup quarterback if there's one available. We've talked a lot about this as well, Mark. I mean, it's a difficult proposition to ask a kid to come in, specifically mid-semester now, right? Come in that knows he doesn't really have the best chance to start and would have to be in a position where they would be comfortable in a backup spot, but understanding they're one play away from playing, and then really being a year away from legitimately challenging for a quarterback spot. But I think there was, I think, of anything on the offensive side, there was just growing concern if Gabriel goes down, that probably in a pretty bad situation, with with Nick Evers and Micah Bowens being the other two scholarship guy. Not that Nick Evers won't be good. I think he's got, you can see the arm talent that he has, and the measurables are what, is what Oklahoma looks for, what Levy looks for. But he's just, he's a true freshman, still should be in high school right now. Brand new offense, just understanding what he needs to do. He's not quite there, but I think that'll be something to look for for Oklahoma fans, just kind of watching the transfer portal over the next couple of months here. I know the deadline to enter is May, but I think they can select their destination until June. I think, is that right?
Yes.
So that'll happen pretty quick, but certainly expect Oklahoma to be a player on the wide receiver and the quarterback front.
Marcus Major sat out. Eric Gray was on one team. Opposite him, Javante Barnes. Of course, he probably, beyond Dylan Gabriel, the guy that most people wanted to see first and foremost. He got 17 carries in the game, which is really high number for a spring game, and didn't necessarily light it up statistically, but I think he showed enough, number one. Number two, I noticed that the first time he got hit, it was only the second or third play of the game. He took a pop. Like, it wasn't the typical hit that you see in a spring game. But your thoughts about Javante Barnes?
Yeah, I think he ran tough between the tackles, as you mentioned. I think he had 17 carries for 60 yards, maybe a couple touchdowns. So not super eye popping just from a yardage perspective, but yeah, his volume from a carries side was good. So I think he's a guy that will be interesting to see how he looks. He was already, he already came in body wise as kind of in a good spot, ready to be able to compete. And I think a summer with Schmidt, he's going to get his body, he'll be a specimen by the time he leaves, right? So I think, in looking at him, Mark, and then just looking at the overall running back room, I think it's such a far cry from where we were discussing this last year. I think Oklahoma legitimately with Gavin Sawchuk coming in and here in the summer, is they legitimately have five guys that they're probably comfortable with, that could play and carry the rock for a decent amount of carries and be comfortable with, right, between Barnes and Gray, and then obviously Sawchuk coming in, Tyree Walker, and obviously Marcus Major. So I think it'll be very, very interesting looking at that pecking order, as it kind of materializes through the fall. I think Gray is pretty clearly your running back one right now. I think when you look at the others, it'll be interesting. I still think Marcus Major is probably the second best running back on this team. But then you've got some battle right there. I think Barnes has kind of solidified himself really as a battle for either the backup or the third string guy. And I think the one thing to remember in Levy's offense is he's going to have a lot of guys run the ball. So would certainly anticipate some situations where Eric Gray is maybe shifted out wide, and you've got either Walker or Major or even Barnes running the ball inside and trying to get Eric Gray out in space. So yeah, I think it's a good problem that Oklahoma has right now, kind of looking into exactly that depth that they need from a running back perspective. And certainly Barnes will be a big part of that. Come mid-year, he may be 1A, 1B there with Eric Gray.
Leave those comments and questions, folks. We're here for the next 30 to 40 minutes talking Oklahoma football here, typically here on Wednesday. You regulars know that. Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central. Needed to get this in. So, again, that's why we say all the time, please subscribe, hit that bell. You get the notifications. You know when we go live. And, again, it's typically on Wednesday, but we came your way a little early this week to talk spring game and get that wrapped up. And please hit the like button as well. This is always difficult to gauge. There's a lot that's difficult to gauge in a spring game, but the offensive line versus the defensive lines. So you got two units, obviously with two teams playing on both sides. So just that comparison of offense and defense, trying to take into consideration, okay, how did the coaches divide this? You mentioned that there was a draft, it appeared, of sorts, and trying to get a gauge on what really matters there.
Yeah, it's tough. I think the offensive defensive line is probably the toughest area when you split when you split those guys up. Now, I think what you were encouraged by if you're watching the offensive line is the physicality from a few of the guys that will be counted on to play quite a bit for Oklahoma. When you look at from a tackle perspective, Anton Harrison and Wanya Morris both played really well. You could tell that they were moving a little bit better, a little bit more physical at the point of attack. I think one of the guys that really kind of stood out for me was Cade Matauer coming from the Cal transfer. He's a guy that I think a lot of us anticipated early on as being a guy that could fill one of those guard spots, and I think he's done nothing but show that he will be that person. So a lot of good blocking from him from that perspective. I think the one thing that we didn't really get to see a lot of is Andrew Rame. He'd been banged up a lot during spring, didn't play a lot, didn't play at all in the spring game. And it's been limited through the spring just in general. I think he's a guy that probably right now, obviously there's some key components of that offensive line that need to continue to get stronger, to kind of fine tune their skills, understand the offense at a greater level with the speed that that Levy's going to go at. But I think at the same time, probably the biggest question mark and thing that a lot of people will be thinking about is the kind of the maturation of Andrew Rame at the center position. Oklahoma is, when you go from Creed Humphrey that they've had over the last 3 or 4 years, obviously not last year, but a couple of years ago, one of the best centers that Oklahoma has had in recent history. And so you're obviously going to have a little bit of a drop off, right? But I think the thing that Rame has struggled with is kind of his upfront strength and really not getting kind of dominated from time to time at the point of attack. So really big spring for him in early fall, because I think it's probably him and Conjul are the two guys that Robert Conjul played a lot center, and there were some questionable snaps. And I think what you have with Conjul is someone who doesn't necessarily have the same athletic ability as an Andrew Rame. However, you know what you're going to get. He's very fundamentally sound. The strength is there, but the athleticism is not quite as what it is with Rame. So so I think it's going to be big for him to stay healthy and have a really good summer with Schmitty and the workout side getting stronger.
Jason also writes for Last Word on College Football. Get on over there, check out Jason's work. Again, Last Word on College Football. And please lock it in on our OU channel here. We provide content just about every day in our weekly live stream with Jason. Was there anything that was said by Brent Venables that would give any indication as to how pleased he was? I'm guessing, as I've heard regularly out of all these coaches, they try to de-emphasize the spring game because they know this is the one that everybody gets to see, and so they blow it out of proportion, as opposed to this is 1 out of 15 evaluations that the coaches have of these players each spring. But whether it's just focused on what he had to say following the game that was directed strictly at this game, or now that he's been able to assess all of spring practice, anything that stands out in terms of what he's looking at?
Yeah, I mean, he talked. He was pleased, definitely pleased after the game was over, and some of the comments that he made. I mean, he didn't go in detail about what specifically he was pleased about, but talked a lot about what he felt was one of the biggest concerns coming in is really kind of the change of culture, right? Changing the culture, practicing the right way, showing up the right way. being physical, like a lot of those intangible things that that he has preached upon early on in the spring camp. So I think he was very well pleased with from that perspective. I think the one thing that he was really just kind of gushed about was the leadership that has began to manifest and kind of bring to the forefront. And an example that he mentioned is with this being the spring game and didn't start till 3 p.m. local time, that he let the kids sleep in a little bit, right? They didn't have to come in as early as they typically would for a game day, or typically where they would for a spring or a fall camp practice. And there was a player led, player only walkthrough that happened. So I think that was something, coming from a coaching perspective, is very pleasing. Obviously, understanding that you've got that buy-in to it to a degree that that they're really they're really bought in. I think he's mentioned that time and time again and talked a lot about that, as well as how bought in he is with the or how bought in the players are with what they're trying to do and what they're trying to create and where they're at. And I think that's the biggest, maybe one of the biggest concerns early on. Not as much about X's and O's, because he's said several times, we're going to be in a different hemisphere, X's and O's related, where we're at right now versus where we'll be at the end of fall camp. But I think what he's doing, what he's most proud of right now, is the foundation that he's been able to lay with these players and setting that stage for what they need to do during the summer to be able to put themselves in position athletically and from a body type. And I think that's the next thing to kind of think about, right? I mean, it's a little bit of a give and take in terms of the strength and conditioning side of things. So you've got to have, offensively, you've got to have yourself in a position where you're able to play at the pace that Levy wants to play at, from an offensive perspective, but also getting bigger and getting stronger, and being able to be more physical at the point of attack is going to be interesting. And I think this comment that you have on the screen here is very evident, because a lot of times on the broadcast, I went back and I watched, and I've seen this question posed just generally for ex players that have been around, like, how is this Brent Venables different than he was before? Before he was the defensive coordinator here at Oklahoma. And I think there's a lot of discussion where, yes, he's the same person, the same passion that he brings to the table is what he always has had, but maybe even a little bit more, which is a little bit crazy, given the fact that this is 10, 12 years ago. You would think that maybe you lose some of the passion, but obviously being the head coach at a big program like Oklahoma, you have to have that passion, right? So I think once I think there's a little bit of Dabo in what he's doing. There's a lot of traditions that he's bringing forward from Clemson that is going to be part of the Oklahoma culture. I think that all-in mentality, I think, is what he's brought in. He's got a lot of Bill Snyder in him, in terms of kind of preparation and things like that. And then, obviously there's some Bob Stoops, part of that as well. So I think, hopefully from an Oklahoma perspective, when you look at it, maybe it's the best of those, of the three worlds, so to speak, and what he brings to the table. But I think the intangibles was a big part of what he was pleased with. There was some bust in the secondary, and there was some communication things that happened that you would typically expect to happen in the spring game. Maybe even things that you would expect to happen in fall camp. But I think the coaching that Oklahoma has on the defensive side of the ball specifically will help and get them in a good position. Maybe not game one, by middle of the season. I think you'll look at a defense that's probably one of the top 20, 30 defenses in the country.
So when you mentioned that it is a bit surprising that somebody maintains or even increases their energy level and their drive, their emotion for a position 10 and 12 years later. I think we also need to keep in mind something that you've addressed in the past, that, Brent Venables wasn't just a coordinator and who all of a sudden, because he had done so well, was offered a head coaching position and then had to kind of scramble to figure out what he wanted to do. He's a he's a good mix, it appears, of somebody who's very uh, communication based, relationship based, but also calculating and organized and thoughtful toward the future. And so he knew exactly the way he wanted to run a football program. And so he's been waiting for this opportunity and waiting for the right opportunity, and had it mapped out how he would do things if he was in charge. And so now he's getting that opportunity at maybe the place he wanted to be. And it's his program and he's running with it.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that you notice early on here, and obviously still ongoing, is that he was very, very prepared for this opportunity, right? And when I say that, like he knows, he has, kind of a list of things that he knows that, number one, he wants to implement. But I think at a higher level, he knew what his plan was for taking on this program, whether it was Oklahoma, whether it was, would have been Auburn, or wherever it would have been, prepared for this moment. A long, long time assistant, and finally getting his opportunity. So yeah, I think it's something that you can see how prepared he was, and certainly there'll be some things that come around where he's maybe not as prepared for, doesn't have the experience from a head coaching perspective. But I think that, it, as of right now, it seems like, and there was a list of things that he said, these are things that we have to have in place before I'm, willing to take this job to be able to compete at an SEC level. So I think understanding those things, and what it takes to be successful, in different areas within, kind of conference wise, and when the difference between, he talked a lot about the difference between being good and being great. And I think if you go from, it's a lot more difficult from going from being good to being great, from being average to being good, right? So I think taking that next step, laser focused on what needs to happen to be able to take that next step to be a, national championship contending team. And I don't think anyone thinks that's going to happen this year, right? I mean, I think, but within a couple of years, I think you can see that this program has the opportunity to, compete for that national championship.
Yeah, the average to good versus the good to great is something that could be measured in a number of ways throughout the football program. But the easiest way to measure it is, obviously, it's going to come down to the wins and the losses. And yes, we see a lot of capable coaches take over. Now, this was not the case here, but take over bad programs that are winning 2 and 3 games, and they elevate them to bowl status, 6 or 7 wins, and that's commendable. It's a significant upgrade, but they're basically beating the teams that they should beat, and maybe winning most of the games against the teams on their tier. And those coaches have gone and they've upgraded it significantly. But to go then from 7 wins to 10, then that's an enormous leap, because then you're talking about knocking off teams that are at the top of your league on a fairly consistent basis. So that takes some. Now, again, the Oklahoma situation is much different, but sure, yes. I don't think anyone would bat an eye if Brent Venables stepped in and Oklahoma won 9 games all the time. And that wouldn't necessarily satisfy Oklahoma fans, but uh, yeah, to reach the level that is his goal and the standard of the program, it's going to take excellence, of course, in all these facets to get it done. All
Yeah.
right, everyone. Yep, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't, and from a fan base perspective, I don't know that 9 wins would even be all that maybe it would be acceptable this year to a certain degree, but I think year in and year out, I think the hunger for being national championship contending worthy, however you want to say it, is really higher than I've ever seen it. Obviously, I've only I'm only 40 years old, so I've not been around a ton, but I think when it's as high as it's ever been, and I think I think the thing that people are gravitating to is not only his personality, but the fact that he's continuously had so much success on the defensive side of the ball. So I think, and then we'll get into obviously as the spring unfolds here, and it will get into fall. We'll talk about schedules and predictions and all that good stuff. But I think a lot of people think that this Oklahoma team has again. Has the opportunity and has the talent, probably still has the most talent in the Big 12. I'll still continue to say that Oklahoma's players are better than the only comparison really is Texas, I think. So, but Oklahoma's players are every bit as good or more talented than anyone else in the Big 12. So if you win the Big 12, you have an opportunity to go to the college football playoffs. So I think, in terms of goals, I think the goals will always be championship, right? But this year, I think it will be interesting because I think people will accept less than a championship this year, understanding the what went on. But I think a lot of people still think and feel that this team is capable of winning a Big 12 championship.
And Oklahoma fans, if you're keeping track, some of you will care about this and others won't. The ESPN FPI, I don't even remember where they have Oklahoma. What stands out to me and what immediately hit me in the face was Texas as the number 6 team in the country. And that was without factoring in the schedule. So it's one thing to say, we're going to factor in the schedule, and they do that as well to give a wins and losses projection, but that just talent equation evaluation, and that spits out a ranking. And for Texas, it's number 6 in the country. I don't know where they can possibly come up with that figure, but not just based on what we've seen, but based on a quarterback situation that's going to be either you're going to have Hudson Card, who was okay last year, but didn't prove to be that good, at least in his first go around, or a completely inexperienced, albeit tremendously gifted quarterback in Quinn Ewers. So anyway, that's the FPI evaluation of the Big 12 race, is that Texas is the favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so convinced that this FPI that ESPN puts out every year at this time is just something to give us. I can imagine that they actually believe in some of the stuff. When you rank a team, and this is not me being salty or anything like that, but when you have a team that's ranked 6th, yet they don't have enough healthy offensive linemen to be able to even have a spring game, like.
Yeah.
It tells me that there's some, and I know there can be some reasons for that, right? You have a lot of movement at the offensive line, and maybe there's a lot of your recruits are coming in mid season as opposed to early, and or mid semester, I should say, as opposed to early. So I think that can be, but when you have a top 10 team and you're already struggling at a depth perspective right there, I think that's something that would be pretty concerning.
Yeah, it's going to have to be proven to me, because they've got a coach who has not proven to win at 2 places where it's been shown you can certainly win. So this is his 3rd go around at a major school. And then again, the quarterback situation, the offensive line has been atrocious in recent years. And sure, they stacked another tremendous recruiting class, but the impact of the immediate recruiting class is typically pretty limited. Although for them, it may need to be more impactful
Right.
and more involved than most recruiting classes for a school at that level. But it will be interesting to see. So in addition to the Dylan Gabriel quarterback play, you reviewed what the backups look like. Now, you mentioned a name to me before we started to record in Emory Jones out of Florida, who's in the transfer portal, but is yet to find a home. And how much substance do we believe there is to the possibility of him showing up at Norman?
It's a good question, Mark. I mean, I don't know how much substance there is, but I do know for some of the things that I've seen via social media. I know that Jeff Lebby just recently started following him and has liked some of his videos and stuff like that. And I think so. I think there's some. I would probably call it mutual flirtation at this point. Kind of, but between the two, and I like, and I think with all of these, with any guy that Oklahoma is going to go after, it's got to be the right situation, obviously, that from a kid's perspective, and the kid has to be willing to come in and know that it is an extreme uphill battle to be a starter day one. I mean, specifically, Jeff Lebby's already said that Dylan Gabriel's a starter. Now, I think obviously they're going to give him every opportunity to compete, and if he were to win the job, so be it. But I think where Oklahoma is right now is they don't feel comfortable with what they have should Dylan Gabriel go down. So I think there's a lot of pushback. I mean, I think on having a guy like Emory Jones come in, but I think the fact of the matter is anybody that watched the spring game either live or on TV has to have a feeling that Oklahoma's in some serious trouble if Dylan Gabriel goes down. I mean, I think you've probably Micah Bones was probably the best looking backup of them all, and he threw a really good deep ball to Jaden Gibson, but there's a couple of situations where he wasn't able to hit a wide open standstill receiver. So I think not that Oklahoma should be completely nervous, but I think they're certainly in the market for someone that has a little bit of experience that they would feel a little bit more comfortable with should something happen to Gabriel, and Emory Jones is a guy that has that experience, who knows how to play. I believe like 19 touchdowns, 13 interceptions last year. So not a great season, but I think good enough that they would be willing to. So if willing to go there. So if it's not Emory Jones, maybe someone else that kind of meets that idea and that criteria. But I think that's something that Oklahoma is going to continue to look for. And so right now, I think there's some, like I said, I think there's some flirtation. Don't know how far it will go. He hasn't. I know that I think the only visit that he's taken, I think, to Arizona State this past weekend, I believe. And so, we'll see how that goes. But I think it's something to keep an eye on, whether it's Jones or whether it's someone else here in the, in the, in the future here.
Arizona State might be a good destination for him. Jaden Daniels left there to go to LSU. Arizona State has two completely inexperienced quarterbacks battling for the starting job there in Trenton Bourget and Paul Tyson, transfer from Alabama, who left Alabama to go to Arizona State. So that's their situation. So Arizona State seems to be wide open. And as soon as we mentioned Emory Jones, Sean and Jimmy were like, no, Emory Jones, no, Emory Jones. And I get that, but he's not going to be the starting quarterback, most likely. And if he beats out Dylan Gabriel, then that is news, and he would have earned it. Secondly, I understand you want great quarterbacks to be, flooding the quarterback room, but you'd be hard pressed to find a better backup quarterback than Emory Jones. They are out there. There's a few, but there's not many. So that wouldn't be all bad.
No, I don't think it, I don't think it would be myself. And the to your point, Mark, I mean, the chances of him unseating a guy like Dylan Gabriel is very, very low, given the fact that number one, I mean, Emory Jones is going to have to learn the offense, right? And it's going to take him some time to return, to learn that offense, and an offense that Gabriel knows like the back of his hand. So, um, I think it's something that is obviously something that Oklahoma is going to, um, whether it's Emory Jones or somewhere else, Oklahoma is going to look at. But it's got to be the right situation. It's got to be a guy that's willing to really understand, what that looks like.
I will let folks know that we are going to be going live during the NFL draft on Thursday night on the main channel. So join us there. I believe the draft starts at 8 o'clock Eastern on Thursday. So we'll be live following the NFL draft and the obvious connection between college football and the NFL. I always get a split audience when it comes to anything I mention with the NFL and even the NFL draft, where half the people say, what are you talking about the NFL draft for? It's not college football. You shouldn't be talking about it. And half the people love it. But we will dive into the NFL draft. And as Jason and I discussed before we started to record, do not expect any high draft picks coming from Oklahoma.
Yeah, they'll probably have a day. They'll probably have a day two guy. I mean, I think here in the comment, Perion Winfrey probably is, from his position, probably will be the first Oklahoma pick. I mean, I think Nick Benito is a guy that'll probably get picked, fairly soon on day two. But yeah, there's probably not a day one guy, but I think Winfrey's probably the guy based on how he played from a Senior Bowl perspective, and his measurables are something that's very enticing to the NFL. So I think he's probably agree with Sean on this one. He probably could be the first guy taken.
All right, folks. Once again, we appreciate everyone here for our OU Sooners Hour that we present each and every Wednesday, but we needed to switch up some schedules, and because the spring game was played on Saturday, wanted to bring you Jason's breakdown at the spring game as soon as possible. So again, we appreciate you being here. Many have joined us just in the last few minutes, so please check out the video and what you missed once the video posts here in about 10 to 15 minutes. All right, Jason, anything else that we missed? One note, because it was mentioned a number of times in the chat, and Jason and I discussed it before we came on. Cody Jackson, the 4-star wide receiver, caught 5 passes last year. Yes, has entered the transfer portal.
No, I mean, I think the only thing, we didn't spend a ton of time talking about defense, but very quickly, I would just say that Marcus Stripling was a guy that was extremely impressive. On the defensive side, was everywhere. I think Ethan Downs was really good. Reggie Grimes got some pressure. I think a lot of things that we've heard in the spring early on was Jordan Kelly had been their best defensive lineman, and it showed very much so there in the spring. Got a lot of penetration there from his kind of defensive tackle spot. And so, and you saw Danny Stutzman was very live on the from a linebacker perspective, kind of running down plays and just being very, very active. So I think, and then when you couple that with the secondary play, which was much better than we saw a year ago at this time, I think there's like I said, there's a couple of busts in the secondary, which you would expect, but I think overall the play was pretty good. In terms of what you would expect from the defensive side of the ball. Tackling was much better physicality than you've seen in the past.
Good show, folks. Our next show, that's what it was coming out of my mouth there. Our next show is coming up at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, Iowa Hawkeyes Live on our Iowa channel. We also have a Nebraska show coming up at 7 Eastern. And actually, I messed up on the banner. It's 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central, Hawkeyes Live on the Iowa channel, and Nebraska Live later. Keep in mind, folks, as we travel through the summer and hit on a number of topics related to the 22 season and previewing position units and all the things that we do, we will do our best to bring on other media contributors from opponents on Oklahoma's 22 schedule, and they can provide some insight into who Oklahoma is playing this season. Jason, we appreciate you making this happen as always for 55th consecutive week. And we will do it all again next week, God willing.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
All right. We'll see everybody back here most likely next Wednesday, but it'll be sometime next week, of course, right here on OU Sooners Live. Bring some folks with you. We appreciate you being here.